Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Joanne Hermiston from the Bivio support team. With me today is Becky Cruz and Ira Smilovitz. We're going to talk about auditing your club records. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you can type them into the question box. We will try to answer them, and we do plan to answer questions at the end as well. For club-specific questions, please send an email to support@bivio.com. So now let's get started. So for auditing your club records, we're going to start right now with a poll that asks you, does your club reconcile your bivio records every month? And Becky's going to launch that poll for us. It looks like most clubs, over 80%, reconcile their bivio accounts monthly. That's great. Now we're going to go on to the second poll. Are you planning to do your club audit this weekend?
7% of you are going to do your audit this weekend, and 92% of you are looking forward to doing it soon, we hope. So thank you, Joanne.
Great. Well, now remember that the Bivio support staff will be available throughout this weekend to answer any questions that you might have. It's okay if you're not doing the audit this weekend. We just recommend that you do the audit soon. And when you registered, we asked you whether you plan to do a club audit and why. I wanted to share a few responses anonymously from the comments. This club answered no, and this was their reasoning. They show their broker statement and match it to Bivio valuation report monthly, and they've balanced every year for 21 years. So that looks pretty good. Now here are two clubs that answered yes, and this was their reasoning. We didn't audit for years, and it was nasty. Mistakes got compounded. And the other club said it makes sense. It is an accuracy check. We have found discrepancies in the past, and they were caught by the audit. I hope that once you've seen this webinar, that you will all see why the first club's reasoning for not doing an audit was faulty. It was because their checks would not have verified all the different aspects of their accounting. Our goal in giving you a way to do a comprehensive club audit is so that you can avoid the mistakes the second club had to learn the hard way. And do you know what? People who are members of investment clubs often are people who like to learn new things. In my experience, members have enjoyed participating in the audit process because they learn new things about their investment club accounting. So what is an audit? An audit is a verification of the accuracy of your club's Bivio records by someone other than your club treasurer. You do an audit for a variety of reasons. For example, you should know that your treasurer is doing what you think they're doing with your club finances. This is especially important if it seems like they've been taking a lot of beach vacations lately. You want to make sure your taxes are prepared accurately. Since they are prepared from the data in Bivio, you need to know that the data is right. Just because your Bivio site shows a lot of numbers doesn't mean they're useful for anything. Without verification, your taxes may just be garbage in, garbage out. And just a reminder that all of your club members will be held responsible if you don't file correct taxes. Also, you want to make sure your members' ownership is being tracked accurately so that income and expenses are divided up correctly and the tax status of your account is being tracked correctly. And finally, it's important to demystify your club's finances and spread the burden of making sure your club is keeping accurate records. Your club treasurer has a big responsibility because your club has to comply with partnership tax requirements. Unlike your investing activities, the IRS is not as forgiving in terms of you being a novice doing so. It's important that every club member have a general understanding of what club accounting is about and what can and cannot be easily handled by your treasurer. The simpler your club finances, the simpler your audit will be, and there's no reason not to keep things simple. There are several types of regular verification that should go on in your club. Each is a little bit different, but they all interrelate. Each month, your club treasurer should do a monthly reconciliation. This should go very quickly. They just need to confirm that the cash balances and the number of shares of stock agree with your broker's statements. They should also have you confirm your member payments were recorded correctly. A brief report on these things should be part of the treasurer's report at your club meetings. These 2 quick checks won't find all the issues that might be wrong in your accounting, but they will highlight many of the most common ones and allow you to address them in a timely manner. Yearly, we recommend, first, that your club do an independent audit. This should be done by an audit committee, which does not include your treasurer. At tax time, your treasurer will do a final check to verify that your 1099s agree with your club records and what is reported on your tax forms. These checks may sound like a lot of work, but if you use Account Sync to make entries in your records, you set up your record keeping to be simple, and your treasurer verifies everything monthly, then your year-end verifications should go very quickly. Today, we're discussing in depth how to do your club audit. Our treasurer training webinars get into more details about doing monthly reconciliations, and our tax preparation webinar will be getting into further details about what to look for on your 1099s. So when should you do an audit? We recommend that you do it in January. Why is that? Well, first, your regular December end of year brokerage statements are ready, so you'll have information for the full year to compare to your bivio entries. The biggest step in doing your club taxes is getting your records in shape. If your records are verified in January, then doing taxes in February when 1099s arrive will be a very quick process. Besides, what else do you have to do in January? For those who get antsy about getting taxes done, an audit helps fill the time until taxes can be prepared. And for those who live in cold climates, who wants to go outside in January anyway? You can do your audit inside where it's nice and warm. So what exactly are you going to do during your audit? You're going to compare the entries you made in bivio to your financial institution records. You do this using reports and transaction lists from bivio, and statements and summary lists from your brokerage, and your bank if you have a separate bank account. How do you do an audit? First, you'll pick a date. It will probably take you about 2 to 3 hours. Pick 2 to 4 people other than your club treasurer to conduct the audit. Prior to the audit day, the treasurer should gather records that will be needed for comparison from your financial institutions and from bivio. On the audit day, the auditors will work through the audit steps, making the records comparisons. If they find any discrepancies, they will note them on the audit checklist. Auditors do not make corrections themselves. When all the steps are completed, the auditors and the treasurer will meet to discuss anything that was found. The treasurer will determine what action is needed, make corrections, and record the action taken. Then the treasurer and the auditors will give the final report to the club. It all goes quickly. Once you get done, you'll have done most of the work needed to get your records ready to prepare your club taxes. All you'll need to do is wait for your 1099s to arrive so your treasurer can do a final quick records check. So to help you do your audit, we provide you with an audit checklist, which gives you the steps to go through. You'll find a link to it from our help page. It looks like this. Here's the cover page. It contains instructions. It has a full list of the different records you'll need to collect to do the audit. And there are 7 steps. For each step, it gives you a detailed description of what you need to be comparing. We'll be going through all these steps in detail so you can see what needs to be done. The first part of doing your audit is gathering the information you'll be comparing. As I just showed you, you'll find a list of what you'll need in the audit checklist. Things you'll need from your brokerage account are monthly statements, trade confirmation records, and you might have individual confirmations, or your broker might be able to provide you with a special report that is a list summarizing them all. You'll need dividend and interest transaction records. You could find these on your monthly statements, or again, you might be able to find a summary list. You'll need a realized gain and loss report. This will show you the capital gains by lot sold that your broker will be reporting to the IRS. It may have a slightly different name at some brokers, such as a closed tax lot report. You'll need an unrealized gain and loss report. You'll need this if any of your stocks went through a reorganization, such as a split, spinoff, merger, redomicile, etc., or if you paid out any withdrawals with your stock. And you might also need this report if your broker sold a different lot of stock than bivio used. So again, this one might have a slightly different name at your broker, such as an open tax lot report. It will show the cost basis details for each lot of each stock that you still own. For any checks you've written, you'll need something to verify the checks were paid by your broker. Proof could be copies they provide or a summary list. Now, your treasurer may be the person who is most familiar with both your financial institution records and with using bivio, so they may need to help you find and gather this information. Sometimes one of the learning experiences about doing an audit is learning the types of information and the way you could get it from your brokerage website. Here's some examples of things you'll find there. You're going to need your monthly statements. On the TD Ameritrade site, you get them by clicking on this My Account link to open this drop-down box. From it, you'll select the Statements link. Now note, if your club uses a different broker than TD Ameritrade, obviously you won't see the same screen layout when you go to your broker's website, but you will be able to find all the information we're discussing on their site. So by clicking on that Statements link, it will take you to this page where you can download all of your monthly statements. For TD Ameritrade, if you go back to the My Accounts menu, you will see a link called Cost Basis. This is how you get a page where you can get to realized and unrealized gain and loss reports. You can see different tabs here. The information showing on the Realized Gain Loss tab is your cost basis and capital gains for stocks you have sold. As we will see later, this will be compared with the capital gains report at bivio to make sure your capital gains and losses will be reported on your taxes the same way your broker is reporting them. It's very important that you know how to find this. If you see little green dots next to any of the tickers, it means you sold more than one lot of the stock. You can click on the dot to open a detailed list showing their cost basis and capital gains for each lot sold separately. If any of your stocks went through any reorganizations during the year, such as splits, spinoffs, mergers, or reclassified dividends, or if you transferred any stock to pay a withdrawal, you'll also need an unrealized gain and loss report because those actions will probably have affected the cost basis of your stock. In TD Ameritrade, you get it by going to this tab. You'll get this page where you can see the cost basis details for each lot of each stock that was affected by the reorganization. You'll be comparing this to an investment lot cost basis report in bivio to see if you recorded it as your broker has. During the audit, you'll be looking at specific types of transactions in bivio such as dividend payments. What's nice is that you can get lists of just specific types of transactions at your brokerage website. In this case, you'll find those by selecting this transaction link from the My Account menu. This opens a page where you can select to see lists of certain types of transactions. In this case, we want to see a list of dividends we've received during the year. We'll be able to easily compare this list to some of the bivio reports as we do the audit. It's important that you become familiar with finding all of this material on your broker's website. Finding it will be a little different for each broker, but it will be there somewhere. Contact your broker if you need help finding something that you'll need to do your audit. You'll be comparing your brokerage information to a variety of reports you'll find in bivio. So I will show you some of those reports. Now you want to make sure you use the correct year and correct date for the report you want to look at. For many of these, it'll be the last day of the year. So we'll enter 12/31/2022, and we're going to look at this valuation report first. The valuation report is used to audit your cash balances, which are down at the bottom, and the number of shares of each stock. And we'll look at the transaction history report. Again, we've got the right date. This report you'll use when you audit specific types of transactions, such as dividends you've received. This report is nice because it's organized into different categories. Next, we're going to come down to the bottom section of the reports and look at the income statement. We have the correct year. The income statement will show you dividend totals by company. Next, down below here, we're going to look at the member contributions and withdrawals report. This report will show you the amount of that each member contributed each month and the valuation date you used to record the payment. Next, the capital gains and losses report. This will show you whether the cost basis information and the gain and loss information in bivio agrees with what your broker will be reporting to the IRS. We're going to go up to the upper section again and select the investment lot cost basis report. We've got the correct date. This report will show you the cost basis details for each lot of each stock that you still own. So you'll see the different dates you purchased it and the different shares at each purchase date. If your club has had any withdrawals, you can find the reports at this link here, and you can see the parameters. You'll click on one of the members, and you can see the valuation date used and the transaction date, the cash, and in this example, there was stock transferred, so you can see the stock information. You'll also find transaction lists, which give you the chronological list of transactions and a running balance. We use them all the time as they are very useful, but you don't get to them from this reports page. You do need to go to accounting. You can get to either accounts, investments, or members. We're going to look at accounts first. So go to accounting accounts and click on one of the names of your brokerage. Now, this one we're showing our inactive accounts, so you can unclick that to just see your current accounts. When you click on the account name, it will open all the activity in that account in a running balance. It also works for the members lists and pages. You can open up one of your members and see all the types of transactions that are recorded for that member. And the same applies to the investments. So here I'll open AppV, and you can see dividends, purchases, sales, all the things, any reorganizations that affected that investment. So that's all we're going to look at with the bivio reports right now. Now you might also need to refer to files you've stored in your files area, which you will find here under communications. For example, good things to store there are receipts for expenses, monthly meeting minutes, where you should find votes where you authorized expenses and stock transactions, and you may also find details about withdrawal discussions. And your partnership agreement. This is where you should find your club's terms for paying withdrawals. It may also show you what methods you have agreed are acceptable to allocate expenses. Once all your records are gathered, the information is given to the auditors. The audit checklist includes 7 steps we recommend they do to verify your club records. They are: verify the cash balances and number of shares of stock at the start of the tax year. Verify the cash balances and number of shares of stock at the end of the tax year. Verify income received is all recorded correctly. Verify any expenses that you had were recorded correctly. Verify that all your stock transactions were entered correctly and that capital gains and losses are being calculated correctly. You'll verify your member payments were entered correctly so that your member accounts are being tracked correctly. And verify that any withdrawals were paid according to your club agreements and that they were recorded correctly in your records. Next, we'll go through each of these steps in more detail. We'll talk about why you do it, go through an example of how you do it, and discuss what to do if you find any discrepancies. Now, just a logistical note. Many clubs meet in person to complete the audit. Many other clubs do an audit without physically getting together. Here's how clubs do the audit virtually. They upload the reports needed to compare into the club's files area in bivio. For example, you can see here that the reports needed to do each step, both from the broker and from bivio, have been captured into folders corresponding to the audit steps. With this information, members can log into bivio and get the information they need to make the audit comparisons. Auditors for the club then do the steps together using Zoom, but you could also assign a different club member to make the comparisons for each step. Two people could even work together over the phone using the information they got from your bivio site to make the comparisons. Your first audit step is to confirm that you started out the tax year with correct records. To do this, you'll be comparing the brokerage statement from the end of the prior tax year, which is 2021, to a bivio valuation report with the same date. So here's an example of doing this comparison. First, you'll compare the cash balances shown in bivio to what is shown on the broker's report. They should be equal, or you should have a reason, such as an outstanding check, to validly explain any differences. If you see cash balances listed for accounts on the bivio report that you don't actually have, then you have issues you need to correct. The only balances shown should be for the accounts that you actually had at the end of 2021. Next, you'll compare the number of shares of stock between bivio and your broker. The number of shares should agree exactly. Now, there might be slight variations in market value by a few pennies, and this is not a problem, and there is no reason to try and find anything to fix. But if there's a big difference, you should investigate further to make sure you do not have investments without current prices. In this case, you will see a note on your valuation telling you that some of your stocks don't have current prices. This is also a problem that needs to be investigated and addressed. Your club accounting is based on accurate valuations. If there is a stock price that is not being updated regularly, your records and your taxes will not be correct. This is a very important step. Why do we do this step? Because if the start of the year numbers for cash balance, number of shares or stock price are wrong, there is no way the tax year numbers will be correct. What do you do if you find a discrepancy? You need to stop the audit at that point and assess the situation. There are many things in your club's historical transactions that are still affecting your current record keeping. A problem at this point means there are issues in your accounting that need to be addressed. They could be as simple to fix as a small adjustment or as complicated as filing amended returns for your club for prior tax years. Feel free to contact us in support if you find a problem and are not sure what to do to address it. So now if you get past step 1, it's fine to move on to the rest of the audit. In step 2, the same comparisons are made, but you use reports dated at the end of the tax year you are auditing, which would be 2022. Why do you do this step? If the numbers don't agree, it will give you an indication that there are items you need to find. Going through the steps of the audit will bring out where they are and what they are. Once you found them, you'll give them to your treasurer to fix. So for step 2, even if you find a discrepancy, You do not need to stop. Just make a note of it and move forward with the next steps of the audit. Just a note at this point, as I mentioned before, comparing cash balance and number of shares of stock, like we do in steps 1 and 2, is something your treasurer should do every month to reconcile your accounts. If you do this, then you can have a reasonable degree of comfort throughout the year that your bivio records are being kept correctly. But they don't tell you everything, which is why you're going to audit the information outlined in the next steps. Step 3 is where you'll verify the entries for any income you have received. This will be dividends and interest. You'll be using a bivio income and a transaction history report, and from your broker, you'll use your brokerage statement and a dividend transaction list. First, you'll compare dividend and interest totals on the income statement to those on the brokerage year-end statement. Note, interest on your money market accounts may show up as dividend income on your broker statement. Make sure it's identified correctly as such in your bivio records. Next, you'll compare the specific entries using dividend transaction lists from the bivio transaction history report and a dividend transaction summary list from your broker. You'll confirm that the date of receipt, the amount, and the company who paid each dividend all agree. Why do you do this step? You have to pay tax on this income. The amount and dates need to be recorded correctly so that the tax program will be able to classify and report it correctly as qualified or non-qualified on your taxes. What should you do if there's a discrepancy? You should proceed with the audit, and you need to note entries where corrections are needed. And now Becky's going to go ahead and continue with step 4.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Joanne. A club usually has very few expenses, but expense entries are a common place in accounting where fraud can occur. In this step, you'll make sure the expenses were both authorized and actually paid, and that they were recorded correctly. To do this, you will need meeting minutes to show expenses were authorized and receipts that you've stored in your file storage area. Canceled checks or a summary list of checks paid from your brokerage will show whether expenses were actually paid. These will be compared against a transaction history report from bivio. You'll also need to know how your club has agreed to allocate expenses. By default, and per IRS regulations, expenses are allocated in proportion to ownership share. If you want to allocate them equally to each member, you need to make sure this method is specifically called out in your partnership agreement. If you've recorded any expenses in bivio, you'll find a link on the income statement report, which will take you to a listing like this. Make sure you have meeting minutes that show where each expense was authorized and a receipt to show it was actually paid. Just because expense entries were recorded in bivio, it doesn't mean they were actually paid to the proper recipient. To confirm how expenses were allocated, go to the transaction history report. If the note on an expense entry indicates the expense was allocated equally, make sure that is allowed by your partnership agreement, and that is what was agreed to for the expense recorded. Why do you do this step? Well, it verifies any expenses were authorized by the club and were actually paid. It also verifies that expenses were allocated to club members in the method your club has agreed on. That will ensure their member accounts in bivio will be updated correctly. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note the entries where corrections are needed. Step 5 is done to verify that all your stock transactions have been entered correctly. You'll want to do this so you know that the value of your portfolio is being tracked properly and that capital gains and losses when you sell stock will be calculated and reported correctly on your taxes. You'll be using a variety of reports to do this step, both from bivio and from your broker, including the bivio transaction ledger report, the bivio capital gain and loss report, bivio investment transaction list, a bivio transaction history report, and a bivio investment lot cost basis report if you've had any reorganizations during the year. From your broker, you'll be looking at brokerage trade confirmation reports, brokerage realized gain loss reports, brokerage statements for months where reorganizations occurred, and an unrealized gain loss report if you had any reorganizations during the year. Let's look at exactly what we'll do with all of this information. Step 5 has 3 parts. In the first part, 5A, you will verify that sales were entered correctly. Then, in part 5B, you will verify that the capital gains and losses shown in bivio agree with what your broker shows. Finally, in part 5C, you will verify that reorganizations were entered correctly and also verify that any cost basis adjustments agree with what your broker shows. In step 5A, you should compare the stock purchases and sales in the bivio transaction ledger to a summary list of purchases from your broker. You want to make sure these things agree. Purchase and sale price and the number of shares at your broker and in bivio. The purchase and sale dates at your broker and in bivio. The total net amount at your broker and in bivio, total cash. Next, you'll confirm that your capital gain and loss information in bivio agrees with your broker. Brokers will be reporting your cost basis and capital gains to the IRS. It's important that all the details for any stock sales you had during the year agree with what they show. To do this, you compare a report all brokers will provide you at any time during the year called a realized gain and loss report. And you compare that with the capital gains and losses report bivio provides you. Here's an example of the bivio capital gains and losses report and the realized gain loss report from the broker. You need to compare each sale shown on the bivio report with the same sale shown on the brokerage report. You should make sure the acquisition date, the sale date, the sales price, the cost basis, and the gain or loss agree between the 2 reports. If they do not, or if you see a wash sale noted, make a note to discuss with your treasurer. They will need to determine the reasons for any differences and make any corrections needed. Next, you need to confirm your records were correctly updated if any of your stocks went through a reorganization, such as a stock split, spin-off, or merger. These can get complicated, and it's important they be entered correctly in your records. How will you know there's been a reorganization entered? Well, there's several clues that might alert you. First, there's a section on the transaction history report that will show you if your treasurer has entered a reorganization. If you don't see anything there, you may have found that the number of shares of stock did not agree with the brokerage statement when you did step 2. This could happen if your treasurer hadn't recorded a reorganization. Finally, whomever in your club is watching each stock should have made sure the club was alerted when the news of the reorganization came out. You should ask your club members before the audit to double-check the stocks they're following. To assess what has been entered, First, find the brokerage statement for the month the reorganization occurred and look at the transactions that are listed. Make a note to ask your treasurer how they determined what to enter. If there's any doubt about an entry, feel free to ask bivio support for confirmation. We will do any necessary research and make sure correct entries are made for you. When a reorganization occurs, the cost basis of the shares of stock involved in the reorganization will change. If the reorganization has been entered correctly, the cost basis of all the shares after the reorganization will agree between bivio and your broker. If it doesn't, there are issues in your bivio accounting that need to be investigated and addressed. If you found that one or more of your club stocks went through reorganizations during the year being audited, there are a few extra checks you need to make. You'll need to compare information on a broker's unrealized gain and loss report to information on the bivio investment lot cost basis report. You'll want to create this report on a date right after the reorganization happened. For example, in 2019, Dow Chemical went through a series of 3 reorganizations, and clubs that own those shares ended up with 3 different companies: Dow, DD, and CTVA. You should compare the following things between the 2 reports: the number of shares of each of the stocks in each lot, the open date for each of the lots, and the total cost basis for each of the lots. All of these details should agree. If you've done automatic dividend reinvesting or have bought a stock on many different occasions, you need to make these comparisons for each lot of each stock. Entering reorganizations correctly can be one of the most difficult things your treasurer needs to do. Part of what you receive when you have a bivio subscription is access to experts that can help you account for them correctly. It's very important to make sure reorganizations have been updated in your records in a timely manner. Your treasurer should do these checks right after any reorganization is entered in your accounting. If issues are not addressed in a timely manner, it can become extremely complicated, time-consuming, and possibly expensive to straighten them out if they've affected subsequent transactions. Here's a list of some of the reorganizations we've helped clubs make entries for this year. And you can see there are a lot, and many clubs are affected. You can get a link to this list named Reorganization Cost Basis Adjustments on our help page. Note that these are only some of those that we've addressed for clubs with questions. There are many others. Why do you do this step? Well, first, it verifies that all stock transactions have been recorded so that the value of the club is calculated correctly. Your entire accounting and tax reporting is dependent on accurate club valuations. Second, it verifies that basis is being tracked correctly so that the correct capital gains and losses will be reported on your income, both for the current year and for future years. This is a very important step. Capital gains and losses will be reported on your 1099 form to the IRS. Your club information needs to agree with what your broker shows on them, and your club records need to be updated in a timely manner when cost basis changes occur. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections are needed. Auditors, do not try and correct them yourselves, but make sure your treasurer works out your issues before you file any taxes. Step 6 confirms that your members' contributions to the club have been recorded accurately. This is important because these records affect member ownership, both the percentage of the club each person owns and the gains or losses they've had from their investment in club. They will also affect whether the correct amount of taxable income will be shown on each member's K-1 form. To perform the check, you'll use the bivio member contributions and withdrawals report, the transaction history report, and you might also want access to your club partnership agreement. You'll be comparing these things to your brokerage deposit transaction summary list or monthly statements from your broker. For example, here, recorded in bivio, is a member contribution of $25.01 made by Snow White. And here is the record of that payment deposited in the club's brokerage account. Doc made a payment of $100.04 on January 18. And here is the record of that deposit. Grumpy's payment of $100.02 on January 18 is recorded here on the broker's deposit transaction list. You'll also want to check that the valuation dates that were used to record the payments were correct. First of all, you'll need to know the answer to this question. What does your club use for the valuation date? Clubs often use either one per month, like this month's meeting date or the Friday before our meeting, or they set the valuation date equal to the date the payment was deposited. If they use one date per month, you should see two things on a member contributions and withdrawals report. For a given month, they should all be the same, and they should not be the same from month to month. If the valuation date is chosen to be equal to the deposit date, you might see different valuation dates for each entry, but the dates you see should agree with the payment deposit dates on the brokerage list. This club uses a single valuation date per month. In March, we see that the valuation dates entered for Snow White and for Sneezy were different than these entered for the other members. This doesn't look right. If the club only has one valuation date a month, they should be the same. It's something to note and have the treasurer check into. For some months, there's no payments recorded for certain members. Is that okay? It might be if the total for the year for each member is okay. That's why you have each member confirm their totals. The final thing you want to do is use the transaction history report to confirm that member deposits have been recorded as member payments, not as fees or miscellaneous income. You'll want to see that each listing in the section is identified as a member payment and not a fee, unless you had some unusual situation and you were charging a member a penalty. So in summary, why do we do this step? Well, it verifies that all members are being given proper credit for their investments in the club so that their account is tracked correctly and their taxes are reported to them correctly. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections are needed. Your final check will only be necessary if you've paid out any withdrawals during the year. It will confirm that withdrawals were processed according to the terms in your partnership agreement and that the correct amounts were paid. You'll be looking at withdrawal reports that were entered in bivio when the withdrawal was generated. You may also need to refer to your club partnership agreement. If you transferred any stock to pay withdrawals, you'll also need copies of the bivio investment lot cost basis reports generated right after the dates of the withdrawals. You'll also need copies of unrealized and realized gains and loss reports from your broker that show the number of shares, purchase date, and total cost basis for each lot of each of the stocks that you still owned or have sold since the withdrawal. To determine whether a withdrawal was paid according to the club partnership agreement, you will have to find the section in the agreement describing the requirements and then review the withdrawal reports to make sure the entries had the proper withdrawal transaction date, the correct withdrawal valuation date, the correct fee assessed, if any, And you should also make sure that your club records had been reconciled before the withdrawal amount was determined. If they were not, you might see post-withdrawal adjustments listed in this section. If you paid any withdrawals with shares of stock and you still owned any shares of those stocks after the transfer, you have an additional check to do. You need to check that the correct lots of shares were selected as transferred when the withdrawal was entered in bivio. You do this by checking that the lots of each stock remaining in bivio are the same ones that your broker showed that you owned after the withdrawal transfer. For example, the demo club paid out a withdrawal with shares of stock on 6/2/2021. They transferred shares of AbbVie, Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft to the withdrawing member. After the withdrawal was recorded, bivio showed these lots of each of those stocks remain in the club accounting on the bivio investment lot cost basis report. An unrealized gain loss report shows the cost basis details of each stock still owned as of the end of the year. Details of each lot should be compared to the bivio report to make sure they agree. Since the club had sold the rest of their Meta stock after the withdrawal, the cost basis details for each lot had to be compared against those on a realized gain loss report. They would not show on an unrealized gain loss report run at the end of the year. So why are you doing step 7? It verifies you have paid withdrawals according to the method agreed to in your partnership agreement. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections or future improvements are needed. If the lots of shares transferred were identified incorrectly when the withdrawal entry was made in bivio, that will need to be fixed by your club treasurer before your taxes are filed. If a withdrawal has been paid and you've paid the member the wrong amount, it may be impossible to correct payment amount discrepancies because the member has left and may have already received and cashed their check. It is also almost impossible to make withdrawal payment corrections in another tax year without creating other big issues for your club. It will be up to your club to determine whether to pursue making corrections, but do not do so until you're sure you understand all of the issues this might create. You'll probably not be able to fix past incorrect withdrawals, but at a minimum, you'll want to note discrepancies as recommendations for future improvement. This is the last step. To summarize, when you're done, you will have completed these steps. Verify cash balances and number of shares of stock at the start of the tax year. Verify cash balances and number of shares of stock at the end of the tax year. Verify income received is all recorded correctly. Verify any expenses you had were recorded correctly. Verify all your stock transactions were entered correctly and that capital gains and losses are being calculated correctly. Verify member payments were entered correctly, so your member accounts are being tracked correctly. Verify that any withdrawals were paid according to your club agreements and that they were recorded correctly in your records. Once the auditors have gone through the steps, here's what should happen. They should discuss any discrepancies found with the treasurer and report them to the club. Your treasurer should report on the action taken to make the corrections. Everyone should sign off on the audit form, and you should pat yourselves on the back. It's party time. Congratulations on making sure your club records are in good shape. Just a brief note about club taxes. Doing an audit covers most of the work which needs to be done to get your taxes done, which is making sure your records are correct. Once it's complete, there are just a couple more things your treasurer will need to do to get your taxes prepared. They'll need to do a final check to make sure the information on the 1099 forms your broker sends agrees with the information that you'll report on your taxes. We'll cover this topic in more depth when we do the tax prep webinar, but just to give you an idea, there are several types of 1099s. Your club should receive them about February 15th, but check your broker's website for their latest information on when to expect them. Forms 1099 Div and 1099 INT report the amount of dividends and interest you received. Sometimes there's information on them that will mean last-minute adjustments are needed to your bivio records. They include things like qualified versus non-qualified dividend split, dates on end-of-year dividend payments, possible reclassification of dividend income. If you sold any stocks during the year, you'll also receive a 1099-B. This is where your cost basis and capital gains are reported. You'll need to double check to make sure they're the same as your bivio records show. The work you did on step 5 of the audit should have found any issues you need to address, so your treasurer won't have to take time to address them when the tax forms are ready. It can be complex and take a long time to fix problems with cost basis. The sooner you find out about them, the more time you have available to get any help you need. Filing taxes is mandatory for all clubs. It doesn't matter how much income you've made or how long you've been in existence. The good news is that once your records are all correct, preparing your taxes is a very quick process. You answer a few questions and press a button. Then you review the forms, file them, and distribute them to your members. They're due by March 15th, 2023. All the more reason to get in the habit of spending time in January getting your records corrected so that you can prepare the forms quickly when you have your 1099s and the bivio tax program becomes available in February. So that's how to do an audit. If you followed our recommendations for keeping your club record keeping as simple as possible, you'll be able to complete your checks very quickly. If you have any questions as you're going through yours, the quickest way to get an answer is to email us with details at support@bivio.com. Please send actual copies of brokers' reports you are comparing to, and make sure to identify the specific issues you have questions about. If you entered any questions during this webinar or in advance that were specific to your club that we haven't addressed, send them to us in support and we can help you work through them. We anticipate the bivio tax program will be available in mid-February. We'll also be doing a webinar about how to prepare your club taxes on February 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And this will include information on electronic filing. You can sign up now for that webinar at www.bivio.com/club_cafe.